The memorial. Sarah Chen's boots crunched on the crystalline gravel as she approached the towering memorial. The alien structure rose before her like a frozen fountain of light, its translucent spires catching the purple sunset of Nexus IV and fracturing it into 1,000 prismatic reflections. Her heart pounded, not from the slight oxygen deficiency of the thin atmosphere, but from the risk she was taking. This was a Scyther burial ground, strictly forbidden to humans. But she hadn't come to desecrate. She'd come to understand. The memorial bore the name Zexthor Kvrain in both flowing Scyther script and standard Galactic. Below it, dates marked a life cut tragically short during the recent unpleasantness, as diplomats had taken to calling the war. Sarah pulled out her scanner, carefully documenting the unique architectural features of the monument. Her research into pre-collapse civilizations had led her here, following patterns she detected in both ancient and modern Scyther burial customs. You show remarkable courage, human, entering this sacred place. The voice behind her was like gravel sliding over silk. Sarah froze, her scanner slipping from suddenly nerveless fingers. She knew that voice. Everyone did. It had been broadcast across 1,000 worlds during the peace negotiations. Slowly, she turned to face Zexthor Kvrain, one of the wealthiest merchants in the Scyther Dominion. More importantly, father of the soldier whose grave she'd been examining. The Scyther stood nearly 3 meters tall, his iridescent scales shifting colors in the fading light. 4 eyes, arranged in a diamond pattern, studied her with an intensity that made her want to shrink into herself. But Sarah straightened her spine instead. She hadn't survived 2 years of fieldwork on hostile worlds by cowering. Lord Kvrain, she said, using the proper honorific. I apologize for my intrusion. I'm Dr. Sarah Chen, archaeologist from the University of Nuterra. I've been studying the burial practices of the civilization that inhabited this world before the collapse. And this led you to my son's grave. His secondary arms folded across his chest, while his primary ones remained loose at his sides, a pose Sarah recognized as one of guarded curiosity rather than immediate threat. Yes, she gestured to the crystalline structure. The design elements here, they're not traditional Scyther. They incorporate patterns I found in ruins across this continent. I believe your people's architects were influenced by the ancient inhabitants when they built this memorial complex. Something shifted in Zexthor's expression, a subtle movement of his facial scales that her human eyes struggled to interpret. You see it too, then. He moved closer, his massive form casting her in shadow. My son spent his final days protecting these ruins. His last transmission spoke of discoveries that could change everything we thought we knew about this world's history. Sarah's archaeological instincts blazed to life. Did he document what he found? No. The attack came too quickly. Zexthor's scales rippled with a pattern that conveyed deep grief to those who knew how to read it. The human forces were never in this sector, Sarah finished quietly. I studied the war records. The attack came from somewhere else. Something else. The merchant's 4 eyes blinked in rapid succession. You are well informed, Dr. Chen. And correct. The official records do not tell the whole truth. He studied her for a long moment, his scales shifting through subtle variations of blue and green. Why do you risk coming here? The penalties for humans in this zone are severe. Because the truth matters, Sarah said simply. Because your son died protecting something important, and I want to understand what it was. Because maybe if we understand more about the people who lived here before, we might stop repeating their mistakes. Zexthor was silent for so long that Sarah began to worry he was deciding which authority to hand her over to. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost some of its gravelly quality, becoming almost melodic. My son believed the same thing. He was not supposed to be a soldier. He was to inherit my trading empire, but he insisted on serving because he believed in preserving knowledge. The merchant's primary hands moved in a complex gesture. The humans I negotiated with during the peace talks were politicians and military leaders. They spoke of resources and boundaries and spheres of influence. You speak of understanding, of truth. He turned to look at the memorial, its crystal surface now gleaming with bioluminescent highlights as true darkness approached. I have significant resources, Dr. Chen. Resources that could fund a proper archaeological expedition. One with full permits and protection. His secondary eyes fixed on her, while his primary pair remained on the memorial. Would you be interested in leading such an endeavor? Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The academic in her saw career-making opportunities. The scientist saw access to sites and artifacts she'd only dreamed of studying. But the human in her saw something else in the way Vexthor stared at his son's memorial, a father desperate to give meaning to his child's sacrifice. I would be honored, she said carefully, but I need to know something first. Are you funding this because you want to understand the past, or because you're looking for something specific, something your son might have found? All four of Vexthor's eyes turned to her, and his scales rippled with what she thought might be approval. Clever question, Dr. Chen. The answer is both. My son's last message spoke of patterns in the ruins. Patterns that suggested the ancient inhabitants had developed defenses against exactly the kind of violence that ended their civilization, and nearly ended ours in the recent unpleasantness. Defenses. Sarah's mind raced through the possibilities. Not weapons. No. Vexthor's scales shifted to deeper blues. Something else. Something he believed could prevent wars before they began. He died before he could tell me more. Sarah looked back at the memorial, its crystalline surface now alive with swirling patterns of bioluminescence that seemed almost like writing. She'd seen similar patterns in the ruins, but never so clearly. Her scanner lay forgotten on the ground, but she hardly needed it now. The evidence was right in front of them, literally glowing in the dark. Lord Cuvrain, she said slowly, I don't think your son's memorial was just influenced by the ancient inhabitants. I think it's trying to tell us something right now. Vexthor's scales flickered with surprise as he followed her gaze to the increasingly complex patterns flowing across the crystal surface. Then perhaps, he said softly, this is where we begin. The first stars were appearing in the purple sky above them as Human and Skither stood together before the glowing memorial, watching as ancient messages began to reveal themselves one luminous symbol at a time. Neither of them noticed the ghostly figure that briefly shimmered in the air behind them. A young Skither male whose scales rippled with patterns of pride and hope before he faded back into the gathering night. Something long dormant was awakening on Nexus IV, and Sarah Chen, the human who dared to trespass on a Skither burial ground, would soon discover that she had stumbled onto far more than just an archaeological mystery. She had found the first piece of a puzzle that would change both their species forever. She just didn't know it yet. Ancient Echoes. 3 months after their meeting at the memorial, Sarah stood in the control room of the most advanced archaeological site on Nexus IV, watching as holographic reconstructions of ancient symbols floated in the air before her. The facility, funded by Vexthor's seemingly limitless resources, hummed with activity as Human and Skither scientists worked side by side. A sight that would have been unthinkable just a year ago. The patterns are consistent across all 7 sites, she said, manipulating the hologram with practiced gestures. They're not just decorative. They're mathematical. Vexthor moved closer, his massive form casting shadows through the holographic display. Like the patterns on Vexthor's memorial. Exactly. Sarah highlighted a particular sequence of symbols. We've been thinking about this all wrong. We assumed the ancient civilization was trying to tell us something about their history, their culture. But these aren't stories. They're instructions. The merchant's scales rippled with interest. Instructions for what? Before Sarah could answer, alarms blared throughout the facility. Red warning lights pulsed as Dr. Kira Patel, Sarah's assistant, burst into the control room. You need to see this, Kira said, breathless. Site 4 just lit up like a Christmas tree. They rushed to the transport pad, the facility's matter stream technology, depositing them at Site 4 in seconds. Sarah gasped at what she saw. The ancient ruins, usually dormant except for faint traces of power readings, now blazed with internal light. Symbols identical to those they'd been studying in the control room crawled across every surface, pulsing in complex sequences. "It's responding," Sarah whispered. "All this time, we thought we were studying them, but they were studying us." Vexthor's secondary hands moved in a gesture of agreement. "The energy signatures are unlike anything in our database, even at the height of the recent unpleasantness. Neither humans nor Skither possess technology this advanced." Sarah approached one of the glowing walls, her scanner whirring. "The patterns, they're changing, adapting, almost like they're learning our languages." Kira finished. "Look at this." She pointed to a section where the ancient symbols were gradually morphing into a hybrid of human standard and Skither script. The message that formed sent chills down Sarah's spine. "The CYKL or EPATS, but AT can be broken." By the first egg, Vexthor breathed, his scales shifting to colors Sarah had never seen before. "This is what my son found. This is what he died protecting." Sarah's mind raced. The ancient civilization. They weren't just advanced technologically. They must have developed some way to transcend the very concepts that lead to conflict. Not through weapons or defenses, but through fundamental changes to consciousness itself. More symbols appeared, forming new messages. "War is a failure of evolution. Transformation awaits those who are ready." Kira's scanner beeped urgently. "These energy readings, they're identical to the anomalous signatures detected during the final battle. The one where my son died." Vexthor finished quietly. "Yes, I'm beginning to understand why." Sarah turned to him, her eyes wide with realization. "Your son wasn't killed trying to protect ruins. He was killed trying to protect whatever is still alive in here. Whatever is trying to communicate with us now." The merchant's scales rippled with grief and pride. He knew. Somehow, he knew this was more important than the war. More important than the petty squabbles between our species. The ruins hummed with increasing power, the light from the symbols growing brighter. In the center of the chamber, the air began to shimmer and distort. "We should evacuate," Kira said nervously. "These energy levels are off the charts." But Sarah stood her ground, and Vexthor moved to stand beside her. Together, they watched as the distortion took shape, not as a hologram or projection, but as something far more extraordinary. A being of pure energy materialized before them, its form constantly shifting between patterns they recognized from their research. It was neither human nor Skither, yet somehow suggested aspects of both species in its ever-changing configuration. "Welcome, seekers," it said, its voice reaching them not through sound but directly in their minds. "We have waited long for those who would understand." Sarah's heart pounded. "You're one of them. The original inhabitants. We are what they became, the being corrected. What all species can become when they are ready to transcend their physical limitations and the conflicts they breed." Vexthor's scales rippled with intense emotion. "My son, did he understand what you were offering?" Zexthor, Kavrain, was the first to grasp the truth, the being confirmed. He understood that the path to preventing war lies not in better weapons or stronger defenses, but in the evolution of consciousness itself. More energy beings began to appear throughout the chamber, their forms casting the ancient ruins in ethereal light. Sarah realized with sudden clarity that the ruins weren't ruins at all. They were more like chrysalises, waiting for the right moment to reveal their true purpose. "The memorial," she said suddenly. "The patterns there, they're not just a tribute, are they? They're a key." "Your son," Vexthor added, his voice thick with understanding. "He didn't just die protecting your secret. He was trying to show us the way." The first being's form pulsed with approval. "The memorial was built according to his final wishes, incorporating our patterns. He knew others would come who could understand its significance. He hoped it would be you, father of his form." Tears, a sight Sarah had never thought to see from a Scyther, fell from Vexthor's secondary eyes. His primary pair remained fixed on the energy being, filled with a father's desperate hope. Can we speak with him? The being's form shifted. Time flows differently for us now. But his essence remains, as do his hopes for both your peoples. More symbols appeared on the walls. But these were different. Personal messages, written in Vexthor's distinctive style. The young Scyther's final thoughts, preserved by beings who understood that some truths can only be properly understood when the time is right. As Sarah watched Vexthor absorb his son's last words, she understood that they stood at a crossroads. The ancient civilization hadn't died out. They had evolved into something beyond physical form, beyond the petty conflicts that still plagued younger species, and they were offering to show others the way. But with that knowledge came responsibility. How would their respective species react to the truth? Would they embrace the opportunity for transcendence, or would they try to weaponize it, starting another war even worse than the last? Sarah looked at her scanner, still faithfully recording data it could barely comprehend, and made a decision. Some truths were too important to hide. Some discoveries demanded to be shared, regardless of the risk. She turned to Vexthor, who had finished reading his son's messages. What do we do now? The merchant's scales had settled into a pattern she recognized as one of deep resolve. We honor my son's sacrifice. We learn. We share what we learn carefully with those who are ready to understand. He gestured to the energy beings still floating serenely around them. And we prepare our peoples for a transformation they can barely imagine. The chamber hummed with power and possibility as human and Scyther stood together, watched over by beings who had once walked the same path they now faced. Above them, through the ancient structure's crystalline dome, the stars of Nexus IV sparkled with newfound significance, no longer just distant lights, but beacons marking the path of evolution itself. And somewhere, in ways that transcended normal space and time, a young Scyther soldier named Vexthor smiled at the scene he had given his life to make possible. The truth beneath. The secure conference room aboard Vexthor's orbital research station hummed with tension. Holograms of classified war footage played across one wall, images that had never been included in official reports. Sarah watched as mysterious energy signatures flared across battlefield after battlefield, always appearing moments before crucial engagements were mysteriously abandoned by both sides. They were there all along, she said, pausing a particularly clear recording, influencing events, trying to minimize casualties. More than that, Vexthor manipulated the display with his secondary hands, while his primary pair gestured toward specific energy patterns. They were selecting witnesses. Look here and here. The energy beings consistently revealed themselves to individuals they deemed receptive. Like your son, Sarah said softly. And now us. The merchant's scales rippled with thoughtful colors. But understanding why raises more questions than answers. The door chimed, admitting Kira and Dr. Naztul, the Scyther quantum physicist who had joined their expanded research team. Their expressions, human and alien alike, carried the weight of new discoveries. We've completed the analysis of the site's quantum signature, Naztul announced, his scales flickering with scientific excitement. It's remarkable. The energy beings aren't just advanced forms of life. They exist in a state of quantum superposition across multiple dimensions. Kira nodded, pulling up her own data. That's how they've remained undetected for so long. They're literally out of phase with our reality most of the time. They only fully materialize when they choose to interact, or when someone proves worthy of interaction. Sarah added, thinking of young Vexthor's sacrifice. The room's lighting suddenly fluctuated, and a familiar shimmer appeared in the air. The energy being they had come to know as the speaker materialized, its form more focused than during their first encounter. You understand more quickly than expected. It communicated directly into their minds. But understanding brings responsibility. Vexthor stepped forward. You've been guiding our species. Both of them. Why? Because you both have the potential to join us. The speaker's form shifted through complex patterns. But first, you must understand the truth of what we are, what we became. The air filled with quantum holograms, images of a civilization far more advanced than either humans or Skither. They watched as this ancient species discovered the fundamental interconnectedness of consciousness and quantum reality. We did not transcend physical form because we could, the speaker explained. We did it because we had to. Our technology had advanced to the point where physical conflict meant mutual annihilation. Sound familiar? Sarah and Vexthor exchanged knowing looks. Both their species had come terrifyingly close to that point during the recent unpleasantness. But transformation requires more than technical capability, the speaker continued. It requires evolutionary readiness, spiritual maturity, the ability to see beyond the illusions of separation that drive conflict. That's what the patterns were showing us, Sarah realized. They're not just instructions for technological advancement. They're guidance for consciousness evolution itself. Indeed. The speaker's form pulsed with approval. Your species are now approaching the same crossroads we once faced. You can choose extinction through conflict or transformation through understanding. But the choice must be made soon. Nastol's scales shifted with alarm. Soon. Why? The quantum holograms shifted to show current data, energy readings from across known space. The same forces that drove us to transcend are building in your civilizations. The technology to destroy worlds spreads while understanding lags behind. Without transformation, the cycle of violence will reach its inevitable conclusion. That's why you revealed yourselves now, Kira said. You're trying to prevent history from repeating. With your help, the speaker confirmed. But we can only guide. We cannot force evolution. That would defeat its purpose. Vexthor's scales rippled with sudden understanding. My son, he wasn't just protecting your secret. He was protecting the future itself. The speaker's form shifted to incorporate patterns they recognized from Vexthor's memorial. He understood that the path to peace lies not in victory, but in transcendence. His consciousness was ready. He joins us now in ways your physical minds cannot yet comprehend. Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes. He evolved. He's one of you. He became more than either human or Skither, the speaker said, as you all can, in time. But first, you must prepare your peoples for truths they may not wish to face. The quantum holograms showed scenes of both human and Skither civilization, the beauty and the ugliness, the achievements and the conflicts. Some will resist. Some will seek to weaponize this knowledge. Choose carefully whom you trust. How? Sarah asked. How do we even begin to introduce such a revolutionary concept to our societies? The speaker's form began to fade. Begin with those who already question, those who seek understanding rather than advantage. Build bridges between your peoples, not through treaties and trade, but through shared vision of what you might become. As the energy being disappeared, one final message resonated in their minds. You have less time than you think, but more health than you know. The room fell silent as the four researchers absorbed the implications of what they had learned. It was Kira who finally spoke. So, we're basically sitting on the secret to transcending physical form, preventing more forever, and evolving into higher dimensional beings. She gave a shaky laugh. No pressure. The real question, Naztul added, his scales showing scientific concern, is how we proceed with this knowledge. The political implications alone. We proceed carefully, Vexthor said, his scales settling into patterns of determination. But we proceed. My son gave his life to bring us this chance. We will not waste it. Sarah stepped to the holographic display, bringing up the pattern analysis they'd been working on before the speaker's arrival. We start with the science, hard data that neither side can dismiss. We build our case methodically, gathering supporters who can handle the truth. And the resistance? Kira asked. You know there will be those who see this as a threat to their power. We stay ahead of them. Sarah said firmly. The energy beings didn't choose us randomly. They chose us because we can do this. Because we must do this. Vexthor moved to stand beside her, his massive form a reminder of how far they'd already come in bridging the gap between their species. My resources, your expertise, Nastol's quantum physics, Kira's data analysis. We have what we need to begin. The quantum holograms continued to play, showing the intricate dance of energies that underlaid all reality. Somewhere in those patterns lay the future of both their species, if they were brave enough to grasp it. Sarah looked up at Vexthor, seeing in his 4 eyes the same mix of fear and determination she felt. Your son believed we were ready for this truth. Let's prove him right. Outside the station's windows, the purple sunset of Nexus IV painted the sky in colors that seemed to shift between dimensions, and in the quantum realm that interpenetrated normal spacetime, countless energy beings, including one who had once been a young Skither soldier, watched and waited as their carefully laid plans began to unfold. The truth was out there. Now they just had to survive sharing it with a universe that might not be ready to hear it. Legacy of Light. 6 months after their quantum revelation, Sarah stood before the combined Council of Species on New Geneva, Earth's diplomatic capital. The chamber, designed to accommodate both human and Skither physiology, buzzed with tension. Behind her, a quantum containment field hummed, ready for their most daring demonstration yet. Distinguished representatives, she began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. What we're about to show you will challenge everything you think you know about the nature of consciousness, evolution, and our place in the cosmos. Vexthor stood beside her, his scales shifting in patterns that the human delegates had learned to recognize as profound conviction. His position as one of the Skither's wealthiest merchants had secured them this audience, but what came next would test even his considerable influence. For too long, he addressed the assembly, we have defined ourselves by our differences. Today, we show you what we have in common, and what we might become. Sarah activated the quantum field. The air shimmered, and gasps echoed through the chamber as the speaker materialized, its energy form more magnificent than ever in the Grand Hall. Greetings, children of matter, it communicated, its thoughts reaching every mind in the room. We come to offer you a choice. The next hour passed in a blur of demonstrations, explanations, and increasingly agitated questions from the delegates. Sarah and Vexthor had expected resistance, but the intensity of some reactions surprised them. This is blasphemy, roared Cathor, a conservative Skither elder. You suggest we abandon our physical forms, become energy. Not abandon, the speaker corrected. Transcend, as countless species before you have done. And what of our civilizations? Demanded Ambassador Chen. No relation to Sarah. Our cultures, our way of life. They evolve, Sarah answered, just as they always have. But this time, we choose the direction. Together. That word, together, sent fresh murmurs through the chamber. 6 months of carefully leaked research data had prepared the ground, but seeing the truth in person was different. Some delegates sat in awe. Others seemed ready to flee. The choice must be made soon, the speaker continued. The energies that nearly drove you to mutual destruction still build. But now there is an alternative. Vexthor stepped forward. My son discovered this truth. He gave his life protecting it until we were ready to understand. I have seen him, spoken with him in his new form. He exists now in ways we can barely comprehend, but he is still himself. Still Vexthor. The chamber fell silent at this personal testimony from one of their most respected members. Sarah seized the moment. We're not asking you to decide today, she said. We're asking you to begin the conversation, to form a joint commission to study what we've discovered, to prepare our peoples for the possibility of something greater than conflict. The speaker's form pulsed with approval, and suddenly the quantum field came alive with images, visions of what their civilizations might become. Cities that existed in multiple dimensions, Beams of pure consciousness exchanging thoughts across the cosmos. The end of scarcity, of physical limitation, of the very concepts that drove them to war. But not everyone was ready for such visions. "This is a trick," snarled General Roberts, rising from his seat. "Is their plot to weaken Earth's defenses?" "No," corrected Admiral Hill of the Scyther fleet, also standing. "Clearly, it is a human deception, meant to distract us from their military buildup in the Outer Rim." The chamber erupted in shouts and accusations. Sarah felt her heart sink, until she noticed something extraordinary. The younger delegates, both human and Scyther, weren't joining the argument. They were watching the quantum field with expressions of wonder. Some had even moved closer together, breaking the species segregation that usually defined such gatherings. "Look," she whispered to Vexthor. "Look at the young ones." His scales rippled with hope. "They're ready," just as Vexthor was ready. The speaker's form expanded, filling the chamber with soft light. "Your fear is natural," it communicated. "Change is difficult. Evolution is painful. But consider this." The quantum field shifted again, showing scenes from both species' histories, moments of first contact, of cultural exchange, of cooperation during natural disasters, moments when artificial boundaries fell away and deeper truths emerged. "You are not as different as you think," the speaker continued. "Your conflicts arise from the illusion of separation. We offer you the chance to see beyond that illusion." Sarah stepped forward again. "We've prepared a detailed proposal for a joint evolution initiative, a step-by-step approach to studying and implementing what we've learned, with full transparency and equal representation from both species. Under the supervision of neutral observers," Vexthor added, gesturing to the speaker, "with safeguards to prevent any military applications of this knowledge." The chamber had grown quiet again, but this time with thoughtful silence rather than hostile tension. Sarah recognized the moment of balance, when change became possible. "There will be resistance," the speaker warned. "Those who profit from conflict will not surrender their advantage easily. You must be prepared for opposition, both open and hidden." "We already are," Vexthor said grimly. His security forces had already thwarted 3 attempts to steal their research and 2 attempts on Sarah's life. "But we're not alone," Sarah added. She nodded to Kira and Naztul, seated among the delegates. Around the chamber, other allies they'd cultivated over the past 6 months nodded back. A network of believers, growing stronger every day. The council's chief administrator, an elderly human named Dr. Patel, rose slowly from her seat. "I move that we create this joint evolution initiative with full funding and diplomatic protection." She looked around the chamber. "The future is coming, colleagues. We can help shape it, or be shaped by it." As the voting commenced, Sarah felt Vexthor's secondary hand rest gently on her shoulder, a gesture that would have been unthinkable a year ago. They watched as the quantum field reflected the shifting emotions in the chamber. Fear giving way to curiosity, resistance yielding to hope. "They'll try to stop us," she murmured. "They'll fail," Vexthor replied simply. His scales showed the pattern she now recognized as absolute certainty. "The truth cannot be contained once it's known. My son understood that." The speaker's form began to fade as the quantum field powered down, but its final message reached them clearly. "The path opens before you. Walk it with courage, children of matter. We will be watching, and waiting, and hoping." As the votes were counted, and the initiative was approved by a narrow margin, Sarah looked out at the merged crowd of humans and Scyther. Some were already forming discussion groups, their earlier hostility forgotten in the excitement of new possibilities. The legacy of light that Vexthor had died protecting was spreading, not with the speed of revolution, but with the steady power of evolution itself, one mind at a time, one step at a time, toward a future that neither species could fully imagine, but both could help create. Outside the chamber's windows, Earth's sun was setting, its light refracting through the quantum-enhanced glass in ways that suggested other dimensions, other possibilities, other ways of being. The next phase of their journey was about to begin. Transcendence. 1 year to the day after their presentation to the Combined Council, Sarah stood in the newly constructed Nexus Institute for Evolutionary Studies. Through the quantum-enhanced windows, she could see both the physical landscape of Nexus IV and overlapping glimpses of other dimensional planes, a constant reminder of what awaited them. The first group of volunteers arrives tomorrow, Kira said, reviewing data on her quantum tablet. 500 humans, 500 Sk'Ther, all thoroughly screened and prepared, and all monitored by every security agency in known space. Naztul added, his scales flickering with wry amusement. We've become quite popular. Sarah smiled despite her nervousness. The past year had been a whirlwind of construction, preparation, and defending their work against both overt and subtle attacks. 3 attempts to shut down the Institute through legal means. 2 more assassination attempts. Countless accusations of heresy, treason, and madness. But they had persevered, and they had grown stronger. The main doors slid open, admitting Vexthor. His scales showed complex patterns of emotion as he surveyed what his wealth and influence had helped build. The Institute was a marvel of joint human-Sk'Ther engineering, its very architecture designed to facilitate the consciousness expansion they hoped to achieve. The memorial is ready, he announced. Together, they walked to the heart of the Institute, a chamber that perfectly recreated the site where Zexthor had made his final stand. But now the memorial bore the names of all who had died protecting the truth, human, Sk'Ther, and others they had discovered along the way. He would be proud, Sarah said softly, touching the crystalline surface. The patterns within swirled in response, more active than ever. He is proud, came a familiar thought voice. The speaker materialized, accompanied by several other energy beings. And he is here. The air shimmered, and a form took shape that caused Vexthor's scales to ripple with intense emotion. It was Zexthor, but not as he had been. His energy form incorporated both Sk'Ther patterns and completely alien geometries, a living testament to what consciousness could become. Father, Zexthor communicated. Dr. Chen, you have done more than we hoped. Was it all planned? Sarah asked. My finding the memorial that day. Everything that followed. We create possibilities, the speaker explained. But you choose which ones to manifest. Your choices brought us here, and now others must choose. As if on cue, alarms blared throughout the Institute. Kira's quantum tablet erupted with alerts. Multiple ships dropping out of hyperspace, she reported. Military signatures, both human and Sk'Ther. The opposition makes its move, Naztul observed grimly. Earlier than expected. But Sarah and Vexthor exchanged calm looks. They had prepared for this too. Activate the quantum beacon, Sarah ordered. Throughout the Institute, specially designed quantum transmitters powered up. Across every ship in orbit, every screen on every world that could receive the signal, the truth began to broadcast. Not in words or images, but in direct quantum consciousness transmission. They showed everything. The energy beings, the ancient civilization's choice to evolve, the fundamental unity underlying all conscious life, the possibility of transcendence, and most importantly, they showed what it felt like, the direct experience of expanded consciousness that no amount of political pressure could deny. They can try to shut us down, Sarah said, but they can't unshow what we've shown. They can't unmake this possibility. Vexthor's scales rippled with fierce joy. The truth spreads at quantum speeds, faster than light, faster than doubt. In orbit, the military ships hung motionless. Their crews, along with billions across known space, were experiencing their first taste of what consciousness could become. Some would reject it. Some would fear it. But some would recognize it as truth. And so it begins again, the speaker observed, as it has on countless worlds. The moment of choice. Around them, the Institute's quantum field hummed with power. The memorial's pattern swirled faster, resonating with energies that transcended normal spacetime. And through it all, the form that had once been Zexthor pulsed with approval. "The path is open," he communicated, "not just for humans and Skither, but for all who are ready, who will step forward." Sarah felt something changing in her own consciousness, a deepening awareness of realities beyond the physical. Beside her, Vexthor's scales shifted through colors that had no names in either of their languages. "I understand now," she whispered. "It was never about preventing war. It was about becoming something that makes war meaningless." "Yes," the speaker confirmed, "and you have proven worthy guides for those who would follow." The military ships were withdrawing now, their crews forever changed by what they had experienced. Across known space, the quantum transmission continued, touching minds and awakening possibilities that could never be put back to sleep. "There will still be resistance," Vexthor noted. "Change comes hard to any species." "But it comes," Sarah replied. "Evolution cannot be stopped, only guided or ignored." The energy beings began to fade, returning to their higher dimensional existence. But Zexthor's form lingered for a moment longer. "The memorial was never meant to look back," he communicated. "It was always a doorway forward, ready to open when enough minds could see through it." As his form dissolved into quantum possibility, Sarah and Vexthor stood before the memorial that had brought them together. Its crystalline surface now showed not just patterns, but doorways, glimpses of what consciousness could become when freed from the limitations of form and fear. Tomorrow, the first volunteers would arrive. Some would succeed in their transformation, others would need more time. But the path was open now, illuminated by the legacy of a young Skither soldier who had seen beyond the illusions of conflict to the deeper truths that unified all life. "Shall we begin?" Sarah asked, reaching out to touch the memorial surface. Vexthor's scales shifted to show absolute certainty as his massive hand joined hers. "We already have." The memorial pulsed with light that existed in multiple dimensions, casting shadows that danced between realities. Above them, the purple sky of Nexus IV shimmered with quantum possibilities, and in the spaces between moments, between thoughts, between the very atoms of existence, countless energy beings watched with approval as the next chapter in conscious evolution began to unfold. The truth that Zexthor had died protecting was alive now, growing, spreading, transforming, not through force or fear, but through the simple, unstoppable power of possibility made manifest. Humanity and the Skither stood at the threshold of something greater than either species had imagined. And thanks to the unlikely partnership of a human archaeologist and a grieving merchant, they would face that threshold together. The legacy of light would endure. The cycle of violence would end, and consciousness itself would evolve into forms that their ancestors could scarcely have dreamed possible. It was not the end of their story. It was barely even the beginning. But it was at last the right beginning.